Barbara Corrales. She's one of our education professors. She has been here since the establishment of the institution, I think.
You're BC. Oh, no.
Yeah.
Good. Where are you from?
And tell me your name.
Some of it, priorities.
Yeah. But you encouraged to come back for graduate.
Of course.
I do. Hi, ladies. Hello. How are you? I'm good. How are you? Good. Did you come because you saw the poster?
Yeah, okay.
Major? I know,
Yeah.
of course I know Major.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
one
exciting.
of the best of my events.
Oh, that's, yeah, obviously he works.
Well, I don't pay him, but I pay him.
Well.
Do they want anything else?
It's good. That's like a lower level of brain.
What do you want to do?
Teach secondary school and
Okay, I
then
want to join you.
get your high school certification.
Okay, so.
Yeah.
Oh, all of these.
Hey guys,
Yeah.
Come on in. where are y'all from? Are you here? Students here?
Where are you coming from?
Okay.
Busy day.
Here in Texas?
So I just got 2 minutes.
Keep it off.
Okay, Maggie. Maggie, this is Missy Beast. She is the principal at the Highlands High School. Right and
Collecting resumes.
she's collecting resumes.
Somebody.
But I just thought I'd let you.
Principal?
I think I missed you.
Yes, yes.
I knew the principal 25 years ago.
But I may know the name.
No, I knew one that was there about 9 months. And he hired me and then they kicked him out,
Do
so
you
I
mind if I sit this here?
taught there.
Oh, well,
But I have a daughter that's
You want any in
graduating.
there?
Mercedes and Pena.
Tell me when you're ready.
We're ready, we're rolling, and there's people watching.
Anyway,
We'll
sorry,
talk
I
about
interrupted.
Here I am at the mic. Is it on?
Doesn't sound like it.
It's on for the stream, I don't know if it's on for the room. Do you?
What, Joe? We go. You can hear me? You hear me now? So, I'm Dr. Janet Bozeman, and I'm an associate professor of education here at University of Dallas in the Department of Education. I have some of our wonderful students here and some interested students in coming to teach in Catholic schools. And then we have a very large group joining us from afar. So I want to give a shout out to you and let you know that we know that you're there and you're watching us and that you're tuning in. Father has some handouts, and we're going to get those linked for those of you who are joining us via live stream. But we don't think we'll have that link done until the end of the session. So be looking for those links. One is on canon law and one is on Merton's thoughts on Catholic education. And this is a very special event. One of the first times that we have ever done anything like this in the department since I came here 14 years ago. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't say we have programs at University of Dallas for preparing Catholic school leaders and preparing Catholic school teachers. And so if you're interested in the Catholic Teacher Formation Academy or the Masters of Catholic School Leadership, come talk to us and we'll help you out and get you going in the right direction for teaching in our schools. So with that being said, I want to tell our people who are live streaming with us that I'm going to be watching the chat box. So if you have questions that you want asked at the end of the program, just type them into the chat box and I will see if we can get through all of the questions that are there. Those of you who are here, be thinking of the questions that you have for Father as he goes through. It's going to be very interesting. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce our guest tonight. It's very special to have him. And it's my pleasure to introduce an esteemed priest and scholar whose life work has strengthened Catholic education and formed countless minds and hearts. He was ordained in 1977, and Father Peter Stravinskas brings with him a lifetime of study and service. His academic path is certainly one for the history books. Undergraduate degrees in classical languages, French, and multiple advanced degrees, 2 of which are doctorates, in biblical theology, school administration, and sacred theology from institutions including Seton Hall, Fordham University, Pontifical Faculty of the Immaculate Conception, and the Marianum in Rome. In short, he has spent enough time in the libraries to make St. Jerome proud. So across the country, Father Stravinskas has served the Catholic Church as a teacher and administrator at every level, elementary through university and seminary, although much of his work has been accomplished in academic institutions. His classroom, though, has never been confined to walls. Through his writing and lecturing, he has reached dioceses through the United States and abroad. He founded the Catholic Answer and later the Catholic Response, and has authored or edited more than 50 books and over 1,000 articles. His leadership continues through his work as founder of the Superior of the Priestly Society of St. John Henry Newman, St. John Henry Cardinal Newman, and as president of the Catholic Education Foundation, advancing Catholic identity and formation in our schools. Most recently, he developed the graduate program in Catholic school administration for Pontificates University, where he serves as dean. Please join me in welcoming a priest, educator, and faithful steward of Catholic learning, Father Peter Stravinskas.
Good evening. It's Archbishop Fulton Sheen, who held court long before any of you or your parents were born, nonetheless used to say, if a speaker gets applause at the beginning of a talk, it's a sign of faith. In the middle, it's hope, and at the end, it's all in charity. So if you don't applaud at the end, I won't be offended. Gallia est omnis divisa et partes tres. Now, if you studied Latin in high school, how many of you did? You would have recognized that line as the opener for Julius Caesar's De Bello Gallico, as he informs his readers that Gaul as a whole is divided into 3 parts. So too, my presentation today will be divided into 3 parts, after a few introductory remarks. We'll consider the why of Catholic schools, and then determine what kind of teachers we need for them, and conclude with a free-flowing conversation. First, let me say that it's a joy and privilege to be with you today, you who are or will be the vanguard of that new evangelization of St. John Paul II. Indeed, I believe I'm speaking to the most important group of persons in any Catholic setting, even more than priests. Why? Because if you were not doing or what you intend to do in the classroom, the priest could not function properly in the sanctuary. In point of fact, without your work of evangelization and catechesis, liturgy would be reduced to magic and superstition. So, as our Lord encouraged his disciples, be of good cheer. You're not merely cogs in a wheel, you're the very hub. My entire priestly life and ministry has been lived in and through the apostolate of Catholic education. How did that happen? Permit me to be a bit autobiographical. When it came time for my parents to enroll their only child in school, they were determined that a Catholic school was the only option. Now, this was not unusual in the 1950s, except that my parents were not typical. They had not attended Catholic school themselves, they were not married in the church, and they hadn't been to Mass for years. So why were they so adamant about my schooling was a question I never got answered. Of course, the real answer is divine providence. And so allow 3 anecdotes to flesh that out. Episode 1. On registration day for kindergarten, my mother brought me to St. Rose of Lima School in Newark, New Jersey. And registration in those days called for 4 documents: the child's birth and baptismal certificates, his inoculation certificate, and the parent's marriage certificate. And Sister Matthew Joseph dutifully checked off each one my mother presented, and then said, and lastly, Mrs. Stravinskas, your marriage certificate. To which my very feisty mother replied, I didn't bother bringing it, you wouldn't accept it anyway. Oh, we'll have to work on that, won't we? Came Sister's response. Episode 2. As an only child, I was excited to begin school. And coming home the first day, my mother asked, how was school? Great. How was Sister? Great. How were the other kids? Great. Did you learn anything? Yep. I learned what I want to be when I grow up. She said, what's that? I said, I want to be a Monsignor. She said, what? I said, Monsignor Gormley came to welcome us to the school, and I think that's the sharpest outfit I've ever seen. And many decades later, you can see it never happened. Episode 3. As Sister Rita Gertrude was preparing us for our first confession, I came home one day, hugged my mother, and said, Mommy, I love you very much. I love you too. Well, I got a question. If I die and go to heaven, and you and Daddy aren't there, would that still be heaven? Why wouldn't Daddy and I be in heaven? See, my mother was a universalist before it was fashionable. Because Sister said, and that was the magical line that settled every argument in every Catholic home. Not Father said, but Sister said, that people who don't go to Mass on Sunday go to hell when they die. Go have your milk and cookies. My father got home. My mother declared, we have a problem with the kid. I never knew my name at home. What kind of problem? He's always been the teacher's pet, which was true. At which point I was directed to my room so they could have a private conversation, a very unusual phenomenon in an only child home. So with my ear to the door, I heard my mother go on, that nutty nun told him that we're going to go to hell because we don't go to Mass on Sunday. Now, no, I didn't say Sister said my parents were going to hell, nor did Sister say that. However, my mother made the appropriate application, right? By second grade, I should mention that my mother was already a full-time volunteer at school. Once the nuns made their mark, there was no release. So my mother continued with my father, when I go to school tomorrow, I'm going to tell her to keep her nose out of our home. And my father said, well, you can do that, but I'm not so sure how much good that will accomplish. I think there's a simpler solution. I think it would be easier for you and me to start going to Mass than it would be to convince Sister Rita that we're not going to hell. And the rest is history. By a process of what I like to call reverse evangelization through the parish school, I brought my parents back to the practice of the faith and also found my vocation at that very tender age, from which I never varied. And that's why I'm so committed to the school apostolate, because I know what the school did for me and my family, it can still do for countless others today, and it does. So how do teachers fit into this picture? So, pars prima. Why do we have Catholic schools, and what do they accomplish? The church has always taught that parents are the primary educators of their children. And while holding to this critical principle of theology and sociology, it would be foolish to assume that primary would mean only. Some Catholic parents, largely under the influence of Christian fundamentalists, took their dignity and responsibility so seriously, they attempted to perform the task of educating their children in moral values independently of the institutional church, failing to understand a point made in the compendium of the social doctrine of the church at number 240, where we read, "Parents are the first educators, not the only educators of their children. It belongs to them, therefore, to exercise with responsibility their educational activity in close and vigilant cooperation with civil and ecclesial agencies." In the 1960s, some opinion makers in the church raised questions about the church's commitment to and understanding of Catholic education as it had been traditionally understood, because the Catholic school curriculum had become similar in many ways to that of the secular schools. And regular school closings, an increased reliance on lay teachers, and a new stress on out-of-school religious education programs as viable alternatives were also operative factors. Another concern raised at the time was whether or not parochial schools fostered a, quote, ghetto mentality, causing Catholics to be unassimilated into the mainstream of American life. Add to all this a decline in Catholic births, parallel to that of the overall American population. The end result found dramatic expression in the thousands of Catholic parents who withdrew their children from Catholic schools or never enrolled them at all, either because there were no schools where the Catholic population was moving, or because parental confidence in the schools and the church had been shaken. Now, 40 years later, and much wiser for the experience, the Catholic community has demonstrated a renewed interest in Catholic education, as enrollments have stabilized and even increased in many dioceses, especially in the Southeast and the Southwest, while serious declines continue elsewhere. Some of this change of heart has come about because parents recognize they need positive reinforcement of their values in the classroom. The secular humanism of the government schools can't help them in that area, and in many cases actively opposes their value system to the confusion of the children. A deeper appreciation of the church as a community has also fixed the idea firmly that there exists a diversity of gifts and ministries. The role of parents is to plant the seed of faith and to nurture its growth. Usually, however, they'll need the assistance of professional educators to see that the seed blossoms. This consciousness has guided the church's understanding of the educational process from the very beginning and goes a long way to explain her intense commitment to providing a total education in a value-oriented environment. There's been an amazing consistency on this, as even a brief survey of ecclesiastical documents would reveal. So let's consider those which have had a direct impact on the church in the United States. The First Provincial Council of Baltimore in 1829 asserted, quote, "We judge it absolutely necessary that schools be established in which the young may be taught the principles of faith and morality while being instructed in letters." And the bishops of the nation made their judgment a matter of church law in 1884 at the Third Plenary Council of Baltimore, where we read, "We decide and decree that near each church where it does not exist, a parish school is to be erected within 2 years from the promulgation of this council." Between those two councils had come the Irish immigration with its unique problems. Undoubtedly, American bishops saw a new urgency to give concrete form to their earlier vision. Some American bishops, like John Ireland, opted for an approach to Catholicism that one might anachronistically dub assimilationism. The Americanist point of view maintained that Catholic doctrine should be presented in a way that would cause as little difference to surface with Protestants as possible. Educationally, the Americanists were opposed to parochial schools. The Americanist heresy was finally responded to, and negatively, by Pope Leo XIII in his 1899 letter to Cardinal Gibbons, Testa Benevolentiae. Canon 1374 of the 1917 Code of Canon Law had this strong statement: Catholic children are not to attend non-Catholic, neutral, or mixed schools. Where no other alternative was possible, the bishop himself had to determine what dangers to the faith existed and then judge if a dispensation from the law would be tolerable. The rationale behind this stringent injunction was explained clearly by Pope Pius XI in his 1929 encyclical Divini Elius Magistri, where he wrote, "The so-called neutral school, from which religion is excluded, is contrary to the fundamental principles of education. Such a school, moreover, cannot exist in practice. It is bound to become irreligious." And while this kind of thinking has been characterized by some as fortress or siege mentality, few observers can doubt that the American public school is a clear example of a neutral school system becoming irreligious, de facto, and some would add, de jure. The fathers of the Second Vatican Council dealt with education extensively as they followed the trajectory of church teaching to that point and contributed to its development as well. Several comments bear notice from Gravissimum Educationis. The bishops write, "The church's involvement in the field of education is demonstrated especially by the Catholic school. Therefore, since it can contribute so substantially to fulfilling the mission of God's people and can further the dialogue between the church and the family of man to their mutual benefit, the Catholic school retains its immense importance in the circumstances of our times too. As for Catholic parents, the Council recalls to mind their duty to entrust their children to Catholic schools." Interestingly, this is the 60th anniversary of that document of the Council Fathers, about which the present Holy Father issued a pastoral letter just last week. Interestingly as well, that document of Vatican II on Catholic education was the first ecclesiastical document in history devoted to Catholic education. We had been doing education for 19 centuries, but we didn't have a document about it. In 1971, the American bishops issued a pastoral letter on Catholic education entitled "To Teach as Jesus Did." It became the standard by which to judge all Catholic schools, outlining as it did the goals and objectives for all Catholic institutions of learning. Included is the following statement: Catholic schools are the most effective means available to the Church for the education of children and young people. Now, many would point to the great irony that at the very moment of that letter's promulgation, pastors around the country were closing schools at an unprecedented rate, some as much as one a day, and usually with the blessing of the local bishop. Pope Paul VI's bicentennial message to the Church in the United States contained praise for the American Catholic school system and an encouragement to continue the tradition. Pope Paul wrote, "The strength of the Church in America is in her Catholic schools." And nor was it sheer coincidence that the two Americans Paul VI canonized in connection with our bicentennial, Bishop John Neumann of Philadelphia and Mother Elizabeth Ann Seton of New York, were prime movers in the parochial school effort. A most thorough analysis of Catholic education in modern times was offered by the Vatican Sacred Congregation for Catholic Education in 1977. Very cleverly entitled "The Catholic School," it probed every aspect of the educational process and also recognized the fact that some people had suggested the phasing out of Catholic schools. The document's conclusion: to give in to them would be suicidal. Pope John Paul II's esteem for the American Catholic school system was demonstrated with amazing consistency. Just months after his election, he sent a videotaped message to Catholic educators gathered in Philadelphia for the annual convention of the National Catholic Educational Association, in which he said, "I hope to give a new impulse to Catholic education throughout the vast area of the United States of America. Yes, the Catholic school must remain a privileged means of Catholic education in America." And later that year, during his first pastoral visit to the States with 20,000 Catholic high school students at Madison Square Garden, he seized the opportunity, quote, "to tell you why the church considers it so important and expends so much energy in order to provide millions of young people with a Catholic education. It is to communicate Christ to you." He likewise referred to the Catholic school as the very heart of the church, enshrining that term in his landmark document on Catholic higher education, Ex Corde Ecclesiae. Pope Benedict XVI at the Catholic University of America in 2008 weighed in as well. He says, "Dear friends, the history of this nation includes many examples of the Church's commitment in this regard. The Catholic community here has in fact made education one of its highest priorities. This undertaking has not come without great sacrifice. Towering figures like St. Elizabeth Ann Seton and other founders and foundresses with great tenacity and foresight laid the foundations of what is today a remarkable network of parochial schools, contributing to the spiritual well-being of the Church and the nation. Countless dedicated religious sisters, brothers, and priests, together with selfless parents, have through Catholic schools helped generations of immigrants to rise from poverty and take their place in mainstream society." He continues, "That sacrifice continues today. It is an outstanding apostolate of hope, seeking to address the material, intellectual, and spiritual needs of over 3 million children and students. It also provides a highly commendable opportunity for the entire Catholic community to contribute generously to the financial needs of our institutions. Their long-term sustainability must be assured. Indeed, everything possible must be done in cooperation with the wider community to ensure they are accessible to people of all social and economic strata. No child should be denied his or her right to an education in faith, which in turn nurtures the soul of a nation." So, what do our schools accomplish? Here's a sampling of some data. Millennial Catholics who attended Catholic schools are 7 times more likely to attend weekly Mass than millennial adults who attended public schools. In 2015, some 51% of those ordained to the priesthood had attended Catholic grade school and 43% at Catholic high school. And that figure was even higher last year. Women who attended a Catholic primary school are 3 times as likely to consider becoming a religious sister. Men who have attended a Catholic secondary school are more than 6 times as likely to consider a priestly vocation. Catholic school students are more likely to pray daily, attend church more often, retain a Catholic identity as an adult, and are faithful stewards. The Catholic school system of this nation began as an adventure unique in the history of the Church, due to the virulent anti-Catholicism pervading the, quote, common schools. It is still the largest non-governmental educational system in the world, even in its somewhat weakened condition, that is compared to the peak years of the mid-1960s. The centrality and necessity of the school apostolate was the underlying conviction of so many American bishops of the 19th century, like Archbishop John J. Hughes of New York, who declared, "The days have come in which the school is more necessary than the church." More pointedly, Bishop Lancaster Spalding of Peoria contended, "Without parish schools, there is no hope that the church will be able to maintain herself in America." Simply put, get the children, you get the parents. That intuition was verified during the pandemic, as Catholic schools were flooded with new students whose parents were disenchanted by the almost universal lockdown in the so-called public schools. Pastors and principals on the ground uniformly reported that the new children had to play sacramental catch-up ball, and while numerous marriages of their parents were convalidated. That's the reverse evangelization I spoke of at the outset. Ideally, of course, children are committed to Catholic schools by serious practicing parents. However, frequently that's not the case. What is interesting about the pandemic parents is that the vast majority came into our schools and they have stayed. Their reflections are worth considering. They say they never realized how cheap our schools are. Most elementary tuition hovers around $5,000 nationally, usually with family rates, and with high schools coming in around $10,000. More importantly, they inform us they never knew what they were missing and how their little children have become little apostles of Catholicism, changing the culture of their homes. One father told me his kindergarten daughter's first day at school came home, they sat down to the dinner table and they started to eat, and the little girl said, "No, we have to pray first." As Catholic schools were a warning in America, the clergy were strong promoters, while the laity were resistant. So much so that bishops had to threaten parents with excommunication for failure to use the schools. In recent years, we find the laity far more supportive than most priests and bishops, sadly, although the younger priests tend to be much more supportive. I suppose that parents living in the real world know the challenges they face in rearing their offspring today, even under optimal conditions. Presumably, that's why an EWTN Real Clear Opinion research survey revealed 47% of Catholic parents with children in the government schools are seriously considering moving them into our institutions. So dissatisfied are they with the lunacy now deemed normal in most state schools. Furthermore, I have a hunch that the rise of the nuns, that's N-O-N-E-S, among Catholics, is a direct result of that generation's being the least served by Catholic schools. I'd like to see that theory tested professionally. A statistic was floated a few months ago that of the 1 million children in New York City public schools, 400,000 are Catholic. That should shock anyone with a Catholic sensibility. That means that nearly 500,000 of our kids are being exposed to critical race theory, gender-bending propaganda, abortion promotion, and other things. When are bishops and priests going to have the courage of their predecessors of the 19th century and declare from their pulpits that consigning one's children to the state schools is endangering their souls? And then we wonder why so many churches are empty. St. John Henry Cardinal Newman once asked what he thought was a rhetorical question in a letter to the Archbishop of Sydney, who was then embroiled in a serious struggle on behalf of Catholic schools. Newman wrote, "It is indeed the gravest of questions whether our people are to commence life with or without adequate instruction in those all-important truths which ought to color all thought and to direct all action. Whether they are or are not to accept this visible world for their God and their all, its teaching as their only truth, and its prizes as their highest aims. For if they do not gain when young that sacred knowledge which comes to us from revelation, when will they acquire it? Indeed, if not when young, when?" Now, par secunda. So what kind of teacher do we need or want for our Catholic schools? One of my favorite Old Testament passages, which I deem ideally suited for Catholic school teachers, comes from the 37th chapter of the prophet Ezekiel. You may recall, I'm sure, Ezekiel is confronted with a vision of a field of dry, dead bones and commanded to prophesy over them so as to bring them back to life. Isn't that the situation in which we find ourselves in the secularized West? Unfortunately, like the chosen people of old, most of our contemporaries don't realize that they're dead and that the culture is moribund. It's our task to demonstrate to them just how lifeless the whole culture is. Were it otherwise, how would one explain the vast array of children with learning disabilities of every kind and medicated beyond all reason? The couches of psychiatrists constantly filled. The suicide rate, especially among the young, the highest in history. Too often, we Catholic educators have been intimidated into silence in the face of what's really an anti-culture, lest we appear out of it or uncool. Back in the silly and very stupid 1960s, we were told that if we could shake off the shackles of religion and morality, we would experience true and complete happiness. Religion, we heard, was an albatross, an inhibition, an obstacle to human fulfillment. Well, the shackles were certainly removed, and the result has been a disaster. With the depressing signs all around us, we are in an ideal position to be educators, in the root Latin sense of the word, educere, to lead out. Leading our students out of the misery and shackles of a godless modernity. We must convince them, being convinced first of all ourselves, of the truth put forth so powerfully by Pope Benedict XVI in his inaugural homily, which in turn was harking back to the inaugural homily of St. John Paul II. Benedict says, "At this point, my mind goes back to October 22, 1978, when Pope John Paul II began his ministry here in St. Peter's Square. His words on that occasion constantly echo in my ears. Do not be afraid. Open wide the doors for Christ." The Pope was addressing the mighty, the powerful of this world, who feared that Christ might take away something of their power if they were to let him in, if they were to allow the faith to be free. Yes, he would certainly have taken something away from them, the dominion of corruption, the manipulation of law, and the freedom to do as they pleased. But he would not have taken away anything that pertains to human freedom or dignity, or to the building of a just society. The Pope was also speaking to everyone, especially the young. Are we not perhaps all afraid in some way? If we let Christ enter fully into our lives, if we open ourselves totally to him, are we not afraid he might take something away from us? Are we not perhaps afraid to give up something significant, something unique, something that makes life so beautiful? Do we not then risk ending up diminished and deprived of our freedom? And once again, the Pope said, no, if we let Christ into our lives, we lose nothing, absolutely nothing of what makes life free, beautiful, and great. No, only in this friendship are the doors of life opened wide. Only in this friendship is the great potential of human existence truly revealed. Only in this friendship do we experience beauty and liberation. And so today, with great strength and great conviction, on the basis of long personal experience of life, I say to you, dear young people, do not be afraid of Christ. He takes nothing away, and he gives you everything. When we give ourselves to him, we receive 100-fold in return. So yes, open wide the doors to Christ, and you will find true life. Magnificent, huh? That, my friends, is our holy vocation, our noble calling, to teach those committed to our care that in following Christ and his church, we lose nothing that is free, beautiful, and great, and gain much more besides. However, every Catholic educator must understand his or her calling and glory in it. So just what kind of understanding will enable you to be effective proclaimers of gospel living and Catholic truth? First of all, before becoming a teacher, one must be a student, a disciple. An old Latin adage instructs us, nemo dat, quod non habet. No one can give what he doesn't have. One must enroll oneself in the school of Jesus. And having gone through a thorough education in the faith and a serious formation in virtuous living, only then will one be able to teach others. Here's what the Congregation for Catholic Education said in 1977. By their witness and their behavior, teachers are of the first importance to impart a distinctive character to Catholic schools. It is therefore indispensable to ensure their continuing formation through some form of suitable pastoral provision. This must aim to animate them as witnesses of Christ in the classroom and tackle the problems of their particular apostolate, especially regarding a Christian vision of the world and of education, problems also connected with the art of teaching in accordance with the principles of the gospel. So, only once we are evangelized can we become evangelists. Only once we become disciples can we become credible teachers. In this regard, it's worth recalling the insightful observation of Pope Paul VI in Evangelii Nuntiandi, his 1975 apostolic exhortation, where he wrote, "Modern man listens more willingly to witnesses than to teachers. And if he does listen to teachers, it is because they are witnesses." Or as the fathers of the Second Vatican Council put it in Gravissimum Educationis, "Let teachers recognize that the Catholic school depends upon them almost entirely for the accomplishment of its goals and programs. They should therefore be very carefully prepared so that both in secular and religious knowledge, they are equipped with suitable qualifications and also with a pedagogical skill that is in keeping with the findings of the contemporary world. Intimately linked in charity to one another and to their students, and endowed with an apostolic spirit, may teachers by their life, as much as by their instruction, bear witness to Christ, the unique teacher. Let them work as partners with parents and together with them in every phase of education. Let them do all they can to stimulate their students to act for themselves, and even after graduation, to continue to assist them with advice, friendship, and by establishing special associations imbued with the true spirit of the Church. The work of these teachers, this sacred synod declares, is in the real sense of the word an apostolate most suited to and necessary for our times, and at once a true service offered to society." St. John Paul, that great apostle of Catholic education, in a 1996 discourse to the International Office of Catholic Education, likewise addressed our topic in some detail. He said, "It is of supreme importance that these educators, who have come of their own accord to offer their services in a Catholic institution or have been recruited by the administration of the school, have a precise vision of a Christian education based on the gospel message. It is a sacred duty for all to bear witness individually and at the same time communally to their faith. Each one in the discipline he teaches will know how to find the opportune circumstance to have the youth discover that science and faith are two different yet complementary readings of the universe and of history. Catholic education must be outstanding for the professional competence of its teachers, the witness of their strong faith, and the atmosphere of respect, mutual assistance, and gospel joy which permeate the entire institution." Notice how the sainted Pope weaves together several threads: personal commitment to Christ, professional competence, permeation of the curriculum with religious and moral values. In other words, religion is only taught in a half-hour religion class, all of which leads to an atmosphere of genuine Christian life. Prayer is also an essential ingredient in the life of a Catholic educator. The Venerable Mother Luisita, foundress of the great Carmelite Sisters of Alhambra, California, asserted without fear of contradiction, "Do not simply be good teachers, be souls of prayer, or you'll have nothing to offer your children." Her assertion brings to mind a recollection of mine from third grade. I noticed that Sister Vera had a black spiral binder on her desk, whose pages she turned one by one every day. One morning, nosy little boy that I was, I asked, "Sister, what's in that big black binder?" "Ah, Peter," she said, "next year you're going to be in that book." I have the name of every child I've ever taught there, and day by day I pray for the children listed on the page for that day. What a beautiful practice, huh? And what a consoling thought for a child to know he's being remembered in prayer by one of his former teachers. In the face of what Pope Benedict termed an educational emergency, that is a worldwide pedagogical meltdown, I want to encourage you not to lose hope. You are not alone in this enterprise. Christ, the teacher, is with you and in through all of that you do. The big elephant in the middle of our Catholic educational living room is that our teachers are not generally well paid. While all of us would like to see that situation improve, let me also make a few comments in that regard. When I was a high school administrator, during Catholic Schools Week, we always had a Teacher Appreciation Day, in the lead up to which I distributed a faculty list to the students, identifying the teacher's field the salary that person received from us, and what that teacher would earn in the government high school down the block. Now, some of the teachers didn't like the practice. They thought it was potentially demeaning. I disagreed, so I continued to do it. Why? Because invariably students would go up to a teacher and say, Mrs. Jones, you mean to tell me you can make $10,000 a year just by walking down the road? Why do you stay here? Those questions became teachable moments, allowing the teacher to explain that he or she was in a Catholic school not to make money, but to share a Christian vision of life, thus inviting the whole school community to life on high with Christ for all eternity. In our materialistic culture, that kind of a witness is invaluable. At a practical level, I should also mention, there are trade-offs in life. If you enter a Catholic school at 8 in the morning with 4 limbs, your dignity, and a lesson plan, I can pretty well guarantee you will leave at 3 with 4 limbs, your dignity, and a completed lesson plan, plus so much more. Now that we've sketched out the identity of the ideal Catholic educator, we may ask what that educator can and should be doing. After all, as the maxim goes, personnel is policy. Now, I'm a great believer in niche marketing. So what's our niche? The goal of Catholic education, of course, is to make saints, which cannot be done in the state-sponsored schools. The first way we make saints is by making our schools liturgical communities, not simply by offering Mass weekly or monthly, which is obviously essential. And let me note that those liturgies ought to be of the highest quality, not sad remnants of the strum and hum era of 40 years ago. But that's a topic for another occasion. Needless to say, every member of the school community must observe the Lord's Day by faithful attendance at Sunday Mass. It is inconceivable to me that any student in a Catholic school, let alone any teacher or administrator, would not take the third commandment seriously. A liturgical school is imbued with an overall environment of prayer and attention to the year of grace. Saints in the making also need the finished products as models. As a boy in grammar school, I finally remember a book we had to read, The Saints, God's Friends and Mine Too. Putting young people in touch with the church's success stories makes sanctity doable and even exciting. Access to grace then makes possible living a holy life, a virtuous life, which is not simply evading the sand traps of the 10 Commandments. In this regard, I heartily recommend a program created by the wonderful Dominican Sisters of Ann Arbor, Michigan. The approach is positive and communal, with the entire school community working together on the development of a particular virtue for any given month. I must say it's quite charming to hear a first grader say he's trying to develop the virtue of magnanimity, but he also can define it. We must train our youngsters to be comfortable living in a countercultural mode, that is, being comfortable in their own Catholic skin, marching to the beat of a different drummer in very significant ways. Attitudes and behaviors which value the human person, which understand the meaning and beauty of sexuality, which grasp the notion that being is to be appreciated over doing. And that's why our Catholic schools, unabashedly Catholic schools, are more needed than ever. We need educational institutions where children are given an environment in which to grow in truly human ways, which are likewise truly Christian ways. In our country, violence and bullying are a regular occurrence in the government schools. Similarly, we read daily of the problem of teenage suicide and clinical depression. Commentators shake their heads and ask, why is this the case and what can be done to remedy the situation? In the midst of these ongoing conversations, a study surfaced coming from a rather unlikely source, namely researchers from the University of California, Santa Barbara. It was called Self-Discipline and Catholic Education. It documents in an impressive manner how, quote, Catholic school children argued, fought, got angry, acted impulsively, and disturbed ongoing activities less frequently than those in state schools and even other private institutions. Further, the researchers said those children were more likely to control their temper, respect others' property, accept their fellow students' ideas, and handle peer pressure. A few years back, I had to evaluate a student teacher in the so-called public school system of Philadelphia. The scenario was abysmal. No discipline, no respect for teachers, foul language, in short, the atmosphere of the jungle. And this from children between the ages of 10 and 12. 2 or 3 short blocks away, there's a Catholic school serving the exact same socioeconomic demographic, where there is order and civility, leading to genuine personal and academic growth of the pupils. While offering several reasons why there is such a discrepancy, the researchers of that just mentioned study noted this: don't underestimate the power of religion to positively influence a child's behavior. Well, you'll be surprised to learn that aside from the Wall Street Journal, I found not a single notice of that study in any of the mainstream media. In 2016, yet another survey revealed some truly distressing data. Catholic children attending state schools are reported to have already left the faith by the age of 10. Why? We read, those that are leaving for no religion, and a pretty big component of them saying they are agnostic or atheist. It turns out that when you probe a bit more deeply and you allow them to talk in their own words, they're bringing up things that are related to science and a need for evidence and proof. On the other hand, I have witnessed Catholic school science teachers complete a lesson on fetology and then launch into a discussion on the scientific reasons behind the church's position on abortion. Even more impressive, a science teacher who finished a unit on genetics and then provided her students with the Holy See's document Donum Vitae for class discussion. Or another science teacher, having presented the scientific method to a class of freshman high school girls, then go on to explain that the scientific way is only one way of coming to the truth, that there are other ways, the way of philosophy, the way of faith, the way of the heart. And he ended by saying, no one of these ways, ladies, is sufficient. We need all of them together. And this from a man who wasn't even a Catholic. Is this being done universally in our schools? Unfortunately not. However, it is being done with increasing regularity, and the very fact that it can be done is already an important element in the overall equation. Our Catholic schools, however, are not novitiates or seminaries, they're schools. The noun is schools. As such, they must be second to none in academic excellence. After all, the Catholic commitment to faith and reason brought about schools and universities to begin with. Therefore, another part of our educational niche is a commitment to a classical approach to the pedagogical enterprise. We're not into trends which are here today and gone tomorrow, leaving students rootless and rudderless. For about 5 years, I did some adjunct teaching at a community college with 95% of the would-be students coming from suburban public high schools that were paying about $68,000 a year for their students. Will you be shocked when I tell you that not one of the students in a political philosophy class had ever heard of Winston Churchill or the Magna Carta? Or when asked what Christian philosopher made Aristotle acceptable in the Middle Ages, one budding historian suggested Socrates. Or in an introductory Latin course, no one could name the parts of speech because they didn't know they existed. And in a comparative religion course, one bright light thought the four evangelists were a new rock group. This is true, right? As an aside, I should tell you that my first day on campus, someone asked if someone had died, because why else would there be a priest there? So yes, content matters greatly. The next step is helping students doing something with the facts, which is where critical thinking skills come in. Let me give an example of what I mean. Some years back, I visited St. Jerome's in Hyattsville, Maryland, a school that's become renowned for turning a very losing operation into the poster child for Catholic classical education. Popping into a 4th grade history class, I asked the children what they were studying. They had just begun consideration of World War II, I quizzed them on the major players, and they had the basic information in place. I then pressed, but why did World War II begin? One little guy piped up, because they didn't end World War I the right way. That fellow had learned how to connect the dots. He was the beneficiary of a truly Catholic pedagogy. Another part of critical thinking is training our youngsters to resist the herd instinct and to know how to evaluate the data with which we are swamped every day. Fake news comes in many forms, but especially from all those beautiful people of Hollywood and the sports world, let alone the news media, who consider it their vocation not to inform us, but to form us. The radical media elite consistently attempt to drive public opinion in a leftward direction. But numerous studies have demonstrated those people are very far removed from the average American. Indeed, their positions on matters like the existence of God, the importance of church membership and attendance, abortion, pornography, issues of sexuality are polar opposites to those of the vast majority of the population. So, help your students see that truth is not the result of a public opinion poll or the province of the one who shouts the loudest. Now, lest you think I view reality through rose-colored glasses or just simply refuse to acknowledge gaps in Catholic schools, be assured that's not the case. Truth be told, in the confused and confusing 60s and 70s, major errors were made in all too many of our schools, as they foolishly sought to mimic the state schools, resulting in a loss of parental confidence and clerical support. Where such a benighted vision and program continues, we should be prepared to hang out the purple bunting. Education for zombies is not the Catholic way. The one good thing about American pragmatism is that if something doesn't work, we're not afraid to get rid of it. And that has happened in Catholic education. For the past decade, I have seen a strong emphasis on Catholic identity. So much so that 10 years ago, the Catholic Education Foundation I serve as president produced a Catholic identity assessment for both elementary and secondary schools. In that survey instrument, we probe every aspect of school life, including the attitudes of administrators, faculty, and support staff, resulting in a detailed report with clear indications for areas requiring development and change. Over 35 dioceses in the country have so far participated in that endeavor. Simply put, if our schools are not going to be authentically Catholic, then there's no reason for them to exist. If they are authentically Catholic, then they will serve the church very well. But they'll also benefit civil society, a point made by Pope Benedict in the talk I cited earlier, when he referred to Catholic schools as nurturing the soul of a nation. Decades earlier, then Father Fulton Sheen declared in one of his radio addresses, "We Catholics are taking religion so seriously in reference to our country that rather than see God perish out of national life, we conduct 7,900 elementary schools and 1,900 high schools. And figuring on the basis of public school costs, we save the taxpayers of the country an immediate $1 billion building program, and for maintenance, $139 billion every year. Every cent of this money comes out of the pockets of Catholics. And why? Because we believe that the children in Catholic elementary schools and high schools have a right to know the truth, which makes them free. Our Catholic children," he says, "have a right to know the truth, which makes them free. Truth and genuine freedom go hand in hand." As academic standards plummet and as moral compasses collapse, the youngsters educated in our institutions will be the only viable sources of hope for the future. This should not inspire an arrogant triumphalism. It should inspire confidence and hope. You'll remember a bit ago, I urged you not to give in to discouragement. Permit me to piggyback on that in 3 ways. First, at times we hear people say, "Johnny went to 12 years of Catholic school, but hasn't darkened the door of a church since graduation." And while this is surely regrettable, it's also evidence that what we do in our schools is evangelization and catechesis, not brainwashing. If every Catholic school graduate emerged a devout practicing Catholic, we might have cause to wonder. Not we wouldn't want that to be the case, we do, but grace is offered and can be refused. As John Paul was fond of saying, the faith is proposed, not imposed. Second, we have something to learn from the parable of the sower, wherein we hear of the various types of soil into which the seed of the word of God is sown. And while we teachers are used to assigning a grade of 65 or 70 as passing, what does Jesus say about a passing grade for a sower of the seed? That is, the Catholic educator. The master teacher himself says, a teacher who succeeds 25% of the time is indeed a success. Why? Because, as St. Thomas Aquinas taught, grace builds on nature. We can only do so much with what we are presented. Or as Cardinal Dolan of New York puts it in one of his regular homey foodie images, you can only make gnocchi with the dough you've been given. Which leads to my last point. Children are coming to us today all too often from homes where the parents don't know how to parent because they were never properly parented themselves. Therefore, teachers today, more than ever before, truly stand in loco parentis. We need to, can, and must evangelize and catechize 2 generations at once, not infrequently 3. That ought not to be viewed as a burden, but as an exhilarating opportunity. St. Edith Stein was a consummate educator, a fact not often adverted to. The Carmelite martyr of Auschwitz maintained that it's the teacher's task to help students, in her words, develop their gifts and talents and find their own place in the community of the classroom where they can contribute to this community. She goes on, teachers who practice their vocation in the above manner pave the way for the recovery of family and nation. And then very realistically, she says, but should it be too late for that? In any case, the teacher works for the communion of saints. When all is said and done, that's what it's really all about, working for the communion of saints. That is, saving ourselves through our noble vocation as teachers and helping to save as many of our students and their families as we can. In one of the more revealing dialogues in the award-winning film A Man for All Seasons, St. Thomas More engages the weasel Richard Rich in a conversation about his future. Rich says he has thought about becoming a teacher, but has dismissed it in the end. Why, asks More. Who would know, responds the egotistical Rich. More, who had a way of getting to the heart of the matter, replies, well, you would know, your students would know, God would know. Not a bad audience. Not a bad audience indeed, huh? Unlike Rich, Cardinal Newman could justifiably boast, it is indeed a satisfaction for me to believe that in my time, with whatever shortcomings, I have done something for the great cause of Catholic education. It's not an accident, of course, that just last week, Pope Leo declared him a co-patron of Catholic education with St. Thomas Aquinas. Pope Benedict, in speaking to a group of American bishops in 2012 on the Catholic schools of our nation, concluded this way: I wish to express once more my gratitude and that of the whole Church for the tremendous commitment, often accompanied by personal sacrifice, shown by so many teachers and administrators who work in the vast network of Catholic schools in your country. I pray that you take to heart the challenge given to Ezekiel and see in the Catholic school apostolate the exciting challenge to bring to life dry bones, which rise up to form an army of Christian soldiers who will be a force for truth and goodness and renewal in the Church and in society at large. We have the assurance of God himself that this can happen. I have promised and I will do it, says the Lord. I always say that a teacher, a parent, or a priest must develop the mentality of the long-distance runner. What do I mean? It's rare to see immediate results for our efforts. Sometimes the affirmation comes years later, sometimes not at all. So I want to leave you with a meditation penned by the great John Henry Newman, a preeminent promoter of Catholic education in 19th century England, and an inspiration for our Catholic schools to this day. His reflection is not valuable solely for us teachers, but also something worthwhile to share with our students as well. St. John Henry writes, God has created me to do him some definite service. He has committed some work to me which he has not committed to another. I have my mission. I may never know it in this life, but I shall be told it in the next. I am a link in a chain, a bond of connection between persons. He has not created me for naught. I shall do good, I shall do his work. I shall be an angel of peace, a preacher of truth in my own place, while not intending it, if I do but keep his commandments. Therefore I will trust him. Whatever I am, I can never be thrown away. If I am in sickness, my sickness may serve him. In perplexity, my perplexity may serve him. If I am in sorrow, my sorrow may serve him. He does nothing in vain. He knows what he is about. He may take away my friends. He may throw me among strangers. He may make me feel desolate, make my spirit sink, hide my future from me. Still, he knows what he is about. Yet, the Almighty knows what he's about. And he has given you, us, the call to teach his little ones about him. What a dignity, what a grace, what a responsibility. And with St. Paul, we pray, may the God who's begun this good work in you bring it to conclusion. And now we can proceed to Pars Tertia. Questions, comments? Yes, ma'am.
Where do you see the difference in the role of the administrator in the Catholic school versus the Catholic school teacher? And like, what are the main differences, their biggest responsibilities?
Well, first of all, I ought to have been a teacher, all right? One of the mistakes a lot of colleges make, they hire a president because he can raise money, but he couldn't ring the school bell if he had to get the day started, all right? That doesn't work. The administrator, it's an additional set of gifts, huh? You can have a great teacher, but he doesn't know how to handle people or situations. And conversely, I mean, I had a principal in high school. She was a phenomenal French teacher, and then she became a principal, and she was a total absolute disaster, all right? That's the Peter principle sometimes, you get pushed to the next level of incompetence. So they're not mutually exclusive. For myself, I've always been, a very organized kind of guy, and I was we were told earlier that I got started in the education game very early. Actually, I entered the seminary right out of high school. I was 17 years old, and about 6 months into my college seminary career, I got a call from the pastor of the high school that I had attended. And he said, I got a problem. Another nun has flown the coop. This was the year when they were running out like crazy, right? And just jumping off the cliff. And he said, the nun who taught Latin has disappeared. Can you rearrange your schedule at Seton Hall so that you can come down here 2 days a week? So I rearranged Monday, Wednesday, Friday at the university, and I went to my alma mater Tuesday and Thursday. Now, to teach in the very high school that I had just graduated from, all right? And when I was 17, I looked like I was 12. And the only difference between me and the kids, all of whom already knew me as one of theirs, was I was wearing a cassock, all right? And I had absolutely no classroom control whatsoever. It was horrible, right? I'm saying, sit down, shut up, do this, do that. And so one of the older sisters pulled me aside one day and she said, honey, come here. She said, you have the makings of a very good teacher, but for discipline, never, ever holler. That's entertainment. She said, when you want their attention, you whisper. I said, sister, I think they hate me. She said, oh, they do. She said, but not to worry. Earn their respect. The love will come eventually. Right? And I think I made a pretty good teacher. All right. And then very, very soon, even still as a seminarian, I was a vice principal of an inner city grammar school. And what happened was you move into situations. And one of the great things about working in and for the church is you always get asked to do things for which you're probably not very well prepared. And, but circumstances prepare you, all right? And as you look back on, your past, and as you get older, you'll see the same thing. You're saying, it was providential that such and such a thing happened. It looked like a disaster at the time, but as a matter of fact, what happened then prepared me for the next hurdle I had to meet. And that's what I discovered with teaching and school administration. So circumstances will generally present themselves to you. And you don't have to be scared about it, all right? I think one of the disadvantages of your generation, one of many, is that there is a tremendous fear of commitment, all right? And I mean, it's the problem that affects vocations to the priesthood or religious life, but also marriage, huh? 40 years ago, people were getting married at 19 and 20. If they get married at all now, it's 30 or 35. They're collecting Social Security. And I had a young man recently say to me, I guess you're going to ask me if I'm thinking about the priesthood. I said, well, no. You asked me, I'm asking you. I'm not a salesman. And he said, well, do you think? And I said, well, what do you think? And he said, well, I'm discerning that. I said, I hate that word, all right? Because that's an excuse for doing nothing, all right? I said, how old are you, Kim? He said, 37. I said, do you realize at 37, I was already a priest for 12 years? And he said, well, you're making me feel bad now. I said, I hope so, right? But it's a terrible, terrible terror of commitment. And I understand why. I mean, you haven't seen much of it in the culture, even perhaps in your own family. And so there's a nervousness about stepping out to do something. I never had that, and I mean, I came from, a less than ideal home, as I mentioned at the beginning. But the culture supported decision-making a lot better, right? Yeah.
Do you think it's necessary for the Catholic schools to be a part of a parish? So that's a lot of middle schools, but nowadays high schools they're not on parish grounds or with a pastor. Do you think that's a necessary thing?
I would distinguish between elementary schools and secondary schools. The best model that we still have for an elementary school is parish-based. And for a lot of reasons. When you have these regional configurations, you end up with an institution for which no one has an identity, all right? The sense of ownership is lacking. And that's not only ownership of parents, but of parishioners that you will expect to support the project. I said, well, that's not our school anymore, all right? It's also much more difficult to get people to commit to it. So now, if the situation is such that you can't afford, you don't have the numbers, it's better to have a merged operation than to have nothing. At the high school level, in the diocese where I went to high school, interestingly, 3 of the biggest high schools in the diocese are still parish high schools. For the most part, though, I think you find around the country diocesan high schools run by the diocese into which numerous parish schools feed. And I think that works okay at the high school level, but I'm not convinced that it works very well at the elementary level. I was involved over the years with opening or reopening a number of schools. And I always tried to emphasize, let's try at first the model of the parish-based school. But in 3 instances, that was just not possible. There weren't enough children in any place to do that. You need a sort of critical mass to get a project off the ground. Do any of the biological men have something to say? Or? Yeah.
No, you go.
All right, Laurel and Hardy, one of you. Okay?
I was just thinking this talk has been primarily based on what it looks like to do a Catholic education. I was just wondering, do you think it's necessary also in our time and culture, I think where most schools are run by the state, do you think it's possible for a Catholic to be a teacher in a public school?
No, absolutely not. It's complicity with evil. I mean, what goes on there, are there good teachers, faithful people there? Yeah, but they can't do their job. You try and tell a kid that what he's doing is morally wrong, you're out. You're gone, all right? When my parents went to public school, they still had prayer in the school. I mean, I'm not in favor of prayer in public schools, by the way. I don't want to baptize what goes on the rest of the day. But they had, in fact, it was kind of an amusing story. When my father, his family moved down from Massachusetts to New Jersey when he was in 4th grade, and there was no room in the Catholic school, so he went to a public school. And in those days, they began the day with the Lord's Prayer, with the so-called Protestant ending, for thine is the kingdom, right? And my father didn't pray it because he was told that's what Protestants pray. Actually, it's the Orthodox did, and the Protestants imitated it, but that's another story. Anyway, he refused to pray the last line. And so at the end of the school year, he got kept back in 4th grade. The teacher said there's something mentally off with the kid. He can't get the last line of the prayer together, right? And now, of course, when that line came into Mass, when I was a kid, he said, if you think I'm saying that line at Mass, I got kept back in 4th grade for it. But it was an entirely different situation. And the moral compass of the country was entirely different, right? I mean, what goes on in the average government school today, and not just the cities, I mean, that's now everywhere, okay? Whether it's the textbooks or, drag queens and all the rest of it. I mentioned to some of the teachers last night, in New York, since the 1980s, they've been picking up 5th and 6th grade girls out of the public schools and bringing them for their abortions without the parents' knowledge or consent, right? How can you, be in, it's like, a Nazi commandant saying, well, I didn't put the needle in anybody, all right? Well, you're there, you're supporting the project now.
What's the the approach of, there's like elementary school, then there's middle school, secondary, and then there's high school.
Mhm.
What's the difference between, those approaches?
I still like the K-8 structure, within which you can have a middle school. And by middle school at that point, different teachers for different subjects and things of that nature. I'm also a great fan of single-sex education. And I tell principals, if you are in a Catholic school that has double grades at least, immediately, wherever you have a double grade, separate boys from girls. Certainly by high school. And I have never attended, taught in, or run a single-sex school, but I know the benefits, all right? And interestingly enough, who benefits more from a single-sex school? Girls, right? Right? You don't have to pretend to be a dumb blonde, right, to get the quarterback for a date, right? You can be who you are, right? A couple of years ago, the only positive article about the Catholic Church in the New York Times that year was in the Metro section talking about Chaminade High School on Long Island, which is 2,700 boys. And so they went around and, typical superficial secular reporter asking the boys, what do you think about going to an all-boys school? And they finally got to one kid. He said, well, I didn't like it to start with, but now I like it. Well, why do you like it now? He said, because I just discovered that the only drama we have here is the school play. Well, that's truth to that. How many of you went to a single-sex school? Yeah. I think it's really very. Now, in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, for decades, they had what were called co-institutional schools. And that was boys and girls on the same campus, a single administration for both schools, but separate classes, separate buildings maybe, or separate floors, except for maybe higher level, like 4th year Latin or physics, that you might bring them together. And then certainly for things like the school play or whatever. I think that's a decent compromise. But the middle school, I like the 8th graders. They can assume a leadership position. as a high school teacher and administrator, I loved freshmen because they're so easily intimidated. It's wonderful, you know? They're nobodies now, all right? You know? And so they're very willing to cooperate with anything. But when they're in 8th grade, and it's a good time with puberty and all that stuff happening, that they can assume some roles of leadership. If you remember that, you know, horrible tragedy a couple of months ago in Minneapolis with the Catholic school, all the kids shot up by the nutcase. 2 things struck me about that. One, the sense of sacrifice of the children for each other, huh? And in that school, by the way, they've been taught that Dominican Sisters virtue education program for 10 years. So they learned what it means to be virtuous. And they also have the so-called buddy system, whereby an older kid is paired up with a younger kid. Now, some of it is to keep good order in church. You know? The kids aren't running all around. So an 8th grader teamed up with a 1st grader and so on. But what did you find there, huh? That not just the 8th grader shielding the body of the 1st grader, but 2nd graders shielding each other's bodies. I mean, that's impressive stuff, huh? And you don't find that in any other institution, right? So I think that structure, the K to 8 thing, is helpful.
We are past our 6 o'clock mark, and I'm happy to stay here, and I don't know how long Father will stay here, but I'm going to ask you to, my question is, we have lots of, you didn't say no to me a lot. My question is, we have lots of teachers here, our potential teachers, people studying to be teachers. And some of them are going to be going into Catholic education. Hopefully all of them will go into Catholic education. What is the piece of wisdom that you could offer them that would help them stay strong in the current of counterculture life? I think that they all understand that this would be a countercultural move, but it still isn't easy.
Yeah, well, you know, only dead fish float downstream. And there's an excitement that ought to be experienced by people who are engaging in a countercultural lifestyle. I did an interview with your president this afternoon, and one of the points I made, I said, you know, if you look at the Jewish community, counterintuitively, the only branch of Judaism that is growing is Orthodox Judaism, right? Which is incredibly demanding, right? Reform Judaism and conservative Judaism, nobody's interested. That's like the Kiwanis Club, you know, who cares, right? You know, wear a skull cap if you feel like, and you know, eat some matzah once a year, right? And we find the same thing in Catholicism, by the way, huh? Religious orders or dioceses that have a strong Catholic identity, they not only have vocations, they have high mass attendance, they have high commitment of lay people to the mission of the church. And also, this is something that to be a Catholic is to live in a community. You can be a Southern Baptist on a desert island for 100 years, and there's no problem, all right? Because it's you and Jesus, preferably if you have a Bible, all right? But that's it. You can't do that as a Catholic, all right? To be a Catholic means to be connected to other people. It's what we call the communion of saints. And ideally, hopefully, in a Catholic school faculty, there's an inbuilt support system for you to be who you should be. Now, warning, there will be some institutions that are still populated by leftover hippies from the 1960s, all right? And they will be, you know, it's unfortunately true, right? And for those people, you pray to St. Joseph for many recent happy deaths, okay? And there's nothing wrong with that. We pray for their salvation, right? And
Death of their career.
So, but for the most part, a lot of what I say today, I said 40 years ago, and got either sneers from teachers or, I don't get that anymore. And then just to back up a bit, I have no problem with a completely lay faculty in a Catholic school, all right? After all, Mother Seton was a lay woman when she started this adventure, huh? And Bishop Carroll kind of pushed her to become a nun and start an order of nuns. But you have to be, well, the grammar school I went to, for example, was huge. We had 2,000 kids, all right? And we had 35 sisters and sections of every grade. And so generally we had 3 nuns and 2 lay teachers. Now the 3 sisters had an internal community formation system, all right? So they knew what they were to be doing. The 2 lay teachers that they had were being formed by the 3 sisters. So there was a very natural environment for what a Catholic school teacher ought to be. That's not the case today, all right? So we have to be extremely intentional about the formation of lay teachers for our schools. We have to be careful that, if they're coming from some public colleges, or worse yet, Jesuit colleges, that they are not importing a philosophy of education which is not Catholic, all right? So, John Dewey and all that nonsense. No, that's not who we are, right? And so I spend, a good deal of my time doing teacher formation workshops all around the country. And I don't find resistance to it, all right? If a Catholic school teacher today isn't doing everything that can or should be done, it's not opposition, it's not ideological, it's ignorance in the root sense of the word, just don't know. And then when you say, think about this, I'll give you an example. One of the workshops I run is called Breathing Catholic Air. It's on how to have Catholic identity of institution, right? And I say, it's not a checklist, okay. Statue of the Blessed Mother, there isn't one in here actually, right? Crucifix, we got one, all right, so 1 out of 2. No, it's more than that. There's an atmosphere to it. And I said, I was doing this for the Catholic teachers in Miami about 10 years ago. And I said, for example, we got papal flag anyway. So I said, for example, you're teaching history and an ambulance goes by. And you say, boys and girls, let's pause for a moment. Let's pray for the sick person and the medical personnel. Or the church bell, you're teaching math and the church bell tolls for a funeral mass. And you say, boys and girls, let's pray for the repose of the soul of the deceased and for the consolation of the family. And this young teacher sitting right here started weeping inconsolably. And I thought, oh, geez, what did I say? I said, are you okay? I said, no. She said, Father, that's so beautiful. That's so beautiful. Now, she wasn't doing it, not because she thought it was stupid. She just didn't know, all right? I can assure you, she started doing it, when she got back to the ranch. So it's a totally different mood. And again, your generation is much more open to some of these things than 2 generations ahead of you. And certainly, if you had wacky liberal grandparents, they are absolutely closed to any kind of development because they're convinced that it was the revolution of the 60s and you got to keep that going come hell or high water. And you just sort of say, well, that's what it is, and you move on from there. But I'm very hopeful about the situation. I don't think we have reason to be concerned. Have to be intentional, but not overly concerned. Okay? Yeah.
This was very briefly touched on, but parents are the primary educators, not the only ones.
Mhm.
So what is either yours or the church's approach in homeschooling?
I'm adamantly opposed to it, unless there is no Catholic school in the area, all right? I would never subject my children to the government schools, that's for sure. But if there is a Catholic school and it's not being used, the the suggestion is that the institutional church cannot be trusted. And that's sends some pretty bad signals. There are some extraordinary circumstances where, either kids' needs or, something, but for the most part, no. And that phenomenon has existed now for about 40, 50 years in the Catholic community. And in that time, you cannot find a single church document supporting homeschooling at all. Right? And, you'll hear people say, oh, well, they get tons of vocations from it and they do this, they do that. I had a young man apply for my Pontifex master's program, and I looked at his record, and he had been homeschooled. And I said, oh, why, you were homeschooled, why are you getting a master's in Catholic school administration? He said, because I was homeschooled. And I think when it works, it can work well, but sometimes there's an awful lot of resentment that occurs when a kid gets older, or says, I wasn't allowed to interface with other kids and so forth, and kind of growing up in a bubble. I don't believe in throwing kids into Sodom and Gomorrah, but at the same time, that's where we are today. And a priest friend of mine was teaching at one of the quote conservative good Catholic colleges that had a reputation for having probably 80% of their kids coming from homeschooling. And he said he was shocked his first year there with the drug, sex, and alcohol, right? Because it's the first time away from mommy. And okay, enough.
We've kept them after, and I really appreciate all the time that you have given to them and your talk tonight, so we really appreciate it. Let's
Don't
give
have to
another
applaud,
round of
remember?
applause.
God bless you. And in 10 years, I hope you're all doing a good job for the church.